It was 11:47 on a Thursday night when Brennan Thayer turned his key into the wrong door. He had been awake for 14 hours straight, rewiring a failed HVAC unit in the basement of Alderhaven Residences, and the hallway on the 4th floor looked the same in both directions. Unit 4A, Unit 4B. His was 4B. The door he pushed open was 4A, and it was already unlocked. He stepped inside and he stopped. Joelle Prescott, the woman the entire building called Miss Prescott, sat on the hardwood floor in a dark living room, knees pulled to her chest, hair undone, eyes swollen red. No blazer, no heels. Around her lay old cardboard boxes, a cracked picture frame with a photograph of an older man she clearly loved, and a crumpled handwritten letter near her bare feet. She looked up, froze. 3 seconds of absolute silence passed between them before her voice broke through, barely a whisper. "Please forget what you just saw." Brennan did not answer. His eyes dropped not to her, but to the letter on the floor. One line at the bottom. He read it in a fraction of a second. "Transfer complete. You have 30 days. He knew exactly what that language meant. He had read sentences like it hundreds of times during 7 years at the Department of Justice. He stepped backward, closed the door, walked to 4B without a word. Everyone in that building thought he just fixed leaky pipes. But the woman on that floor had no idea that the only person who could read that letter for what it really was had just closed her door. If someone begged you to forget what you saw, but you knew staying silent could cost them everything, would you walk away? Brennan Thayer woke at 5:40 the next morning, the way he always did, without an alarm, without noise, without urgency. He swung his legs off the narrow bed in Unit 4B, a staff apartment the size of a studio, and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom. A fold-out couch in the corner where his daughter slept. A bathroom that barely fit a standing shower. But the walls were covered in color crayon drawings, watercolor experiments, pencil sketches taped edge to edge, all of them signed in wobbly letters by the same artist. Willa. She was 8 years old, and she drew everything. Trees, stars, her father's boots. The view from the rooftop where the two of them lay on a blanket every Friday night and watched the sky turn. That was their tradition. Every Friday. No exceptions. She appeared in the kitchen doorway now, hair tangled, dragging a stuffed bear by one arm. She climbed onto the stool at the counter and opened her sketch pad while Brennan poured cereal and sliced a banana onto the side of her bowl. She was drawing something new, 2 figures lying on a flat rooftop, a dark sky above them, stars everywhere, one star bigger and brighter than the rest, colored in thick yellow crayon. She tilted her head without looking up. "Daddy, do stars move?" Brennan tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Everything moves, sweetheart. Just some things move too slow for us to notice." She nodded as if that made perfect sense and kept coloring. He packed her lunch, zipped her backpack, and walked her to the bus stop at the corner of Alderhaven's front entrance. He watched the bus pull away, Willa's face in the window, waving with one hand, holding the bear with the other. Then he went back inside and became invisible. That was the word for it. Invisible. He spent the next 8 hours replacing a hallway light on the 2nd floor, snaking a drain in the laundry room, resetting a breaker panel in the basement, and responding to 4 separate maintenance requests from residents who did not know his name. The woman on the 3rd floor called him "Hey." The man on the 5th floor pointed a finger at his face and said, "The faucet in the guest bath today, not tomorrow." No one said please, no one said thank you. 5 years earlier, Brennan Thayer had sat at a desk in a windowless office inside the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. The desk had been buried under binders, printouts, and SEC filings. Behind him, a whiteboard covered edge to edge with hand-drawn diagrams, arrows connecting shell corporations across 4 countries, dollar amounts in red, timestamps in blue. His colleagues had called him the Mapper, not because he used software, because he did not need it. He could look at a spreadsheet for 30 seconds and see what algorithms missed the rhythm of fraud, the architecture of hidden money. In 7 years, he had helped dismantle 3 major laundering networks. The last one, Kellerson Pacific, recovered $220 million. On his final day, he had placed his DOJ badge on his supervisor's desk and said 5 words, "My daughter needs a father." He had not touched a financial document since. Now he stood in the basement of a luxury apartment building, staring at an HVAC control panel, and his mind was somewhere else entirely. The letter on Joelle Prescott's floor. Transfer complete. You have 30 days. He recognized the syntax ultimatum language, the kind that accompanied coercion or asset seizure, not personal, financial. Someone was threatening her, and the threat had a deadline. He closed the panel, wiped his hands on a rag, and told himself the same thing he had told himself every day for 5 years. Not my problem. I just fix pipes. On his way to the elevator, he passed Unit 4A. The door was shut, but under the gap at the bottom, light still glowed. Joelle Prescott had not slept, and on the hallway floor, just outside her threshold, lay a shard of broken picture framed the photograph of the older man, cracked clean down the middle. Someone had thrown it from inside. The next morning, Joelle Prescott walked into the boardroom of Prescott Dynamics as if nothing had happened. The company occupied 4 floors of a glass and steel tower in downtown Richmond, and its name was etched into the lobby wall in brushed aluminum letters. Her father had founded it 26 years ago, a clean energy engineering firm that had grown from a 3-person office into a $200 million enterprise. He had died 3 years ago. Heart attack, desk chair, alone. The company passed to Joelle, and so did every enemy her father never knew he had. She entered the quarterly board meeting in a black blazer and heels, her face composed, her posture flawless. No one could see the bruise on her palm, the one she had earned the night before, punching the hardwood floor of her own living room. 7 board members sat around the conference table. At the far end, Trent Morrissey stood beside a projection screen, pointer in hand, smiling. Trent was 44, broad-shouldered, silver-templed, immaculately groomed. He had been the company's chief financial officer for 11 years and the most trusted man in the building. Joelle's father had treated him like a brother. The board treated him like a saint. He presented the quarterly numbers with the ease of a man who had rehearsed the performance 100 times. Revenue up, expenses down, margins improving, outlook strong. Every slide was clean. Every answer was polished. The board members nodded. One of them said, "Outstanding work, Trent." Joelle sat across from him, silent, her pen pressed so hard against her notepad that the tip bent. She knew the numbers were wrong. For 3 months, she had been tracking an anomaly in the company's cash flow, $14 million routed through consulting fees that no one could explain, payments to firms she had never heard of, authorized by a signature she could not trace. The boxes in her apartment, the ones Brennan had seen, contained financial records from her father's era, documents she had been comparing line by line to current filings, searching for the moment the money started disappearing. The letter was from a law firm she did not recognize, referencing a transfer of contested assets and a 30-day compliance window. She did not fully understand what it meant. She was not a financial analyst, but her instinct screamed that someone inside this company was stealing it from the inside out. After the meeting, Trent paused at the door and turned to her. His voice was warm, almost paternal. "You look exhausted, Joelle. Maybe take a step back, let the finance team handle the heavy lifting." It sounded like concern. It was a cage. She said nothing, and he walked away. That evening, she returned to Alderhaven. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, and Brennan was standing in the hallway, replacing a light fixture above Unit 4C. Their eyes met. Joelle pulled her gaze away, stepped out, and shut the door of 4A behind her without a word. She did not know that Brennan had stood in that hallway for 3 full seconds after the door closed, looking at the light still bleeding under her threshold. The following Saturday, Trent Morrissey hosted a charity gala on the rooftop lounge of Alderhaven Residences. It was his idea, a donor event for the Prescott Foundation, attended by board members, investors, and Richmond's wealthiest families. Jazz quartet, champagne, catered hors d'oeuvre on white linen, the kind of evening designed to remind everyone in the room that Trent Morrissey was not just a CFO, he was the heartbeat of the company. Brennan had been assigned to work the event, not as a guest, as labor. He spent the first hour adjusting microphone levels, running cable along the railing, checking the portable generator, and hauling chairs from the storage room on the 3rd floor. He wore his usual gray maintenance shirt. No one spoke to him. No one looked at him. He was furniture. Midway through the evening, Trent stepped up to the microphone. The crowd quieted. He began a toast, gracious, eloquent, warm, and then his eyes landed on Brennan, who was kneeling near the speaker stack, plugging in a backup cable. Trent paused, smiled, turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet the most essential man in this building." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "He keeps our toilets running." More laughter. Trent stepped down from the riser, crossed the floor, and clapped Brennan on the shoulder like they were old friends. "No offense, buddy. Someone's got to do it, right?" The guests chuckled. A few raised their glasses. Brennan stood slowly. He did not smile. He did not flinch. He looked directly at Trent, eye to eye, no movement, no expression, and said nothing. The silence between them lasted 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, something shifted in the air that no one else noticed. Joelle stood 3 meters away, holding a glass of wine. She did not laugh, but she did not speak either. She watched Brennan the way someone watches a stranger on a park bench, with distant, mild sympathy. Poor man. An investor stepped forward, swirling a tumbler. "So what did you do before this?" The word "this" landed with deliberate weight. Brennan answered without hesitation. "Data work." The investor smiled. "Well, we all got to start somewhere." He turned away. Trent leaned toward Joelle, speaking just loud enough for the circle around them to hear. "See? This is why I handle the numbers, Joelle. Not everyone's built for it." The sentence was a weapon shaped like advice, aimed at Brennan, loaded for Joelle. Brennan stood still for 3 more seconds. Then he bent down, picked up the cable he had been connecting, plugged it into the speaker, and returned to his work as if nothing had happened. No reaction, no flinch, no flush of anger. That stillness, that absolute refusal to perform humiliation, unsettled something in the room. A woman near the bar lowered her glass. A board member shifted in his seat. The laughter had already died, and no one quite knew how to restart it. Brennan finished the speaker check, picked up his toolbox, and left the rooftop without a word. He took the stairwell, not the elevator. On the 3rd floor, he paused in front of the building's server room. His master key could open every utility door in the building, including this one. He looked at it. Then he kept walking. Not yet, but he had already catalogued Trent Morrissey. The charm, the control of the room, the way aggression hid inside friendliness like a blade inside a loaf of bread. Brennan had seen that pattern dozens of times in 7 years at the DOJ. It was the architecture of concealment, and it always meant the same thing. Someone was hiding something worth finding. 2 days after the gala, Brennan received a maintenance request from Unit 4A. The Wi-Fi router was malfunctioning. He took the elevator up with his toolkit, knocked, and waited. Joelle opened the door in a gray sweater, no makeup, hair tied back. Her expression was cold. "Fix the router and leave." He nodded and stepped inside. The living room had been cleaned, no boxes, no broken frames, but the dining table was stacked with documents, partially concealed by a linen cloth draped across the surface. One corner of a printed spreadsheet peeked out from beneath the fabric. Brennan knelt by the router near the wall, reset the firmware, tested the signal, and stood. On his way to the door, he passed the table. His eyes, trained over 7 years to scan numbers the way a hawk scans open ground, caught 2 seconds of the exposed spreadsheet. Columns of outbound transfers, micro amounts structured just below standard audit thresholds, a routing pattern he recognized immediately, designed not to move money, but to hide the fact that money was being moved. Joelle noticed him glance and yanked the cloth over the page. He said nothing. He walked to the door, placed his hand on the knob, and stopped. His back was to her. "The transfers on your table, they're not going through one shell company." His voice was low, steady, almost indifferent. "There are at least 3 layers. The first one's registered in Delaware. If you're only checking 2, you'll never find where the money exits." The room went silent. Joelle stared at the back of his head. "What did you just say?" Brennan opened the door. "Your router's fixed." He stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind him. Joelle stood alone in the penthouse for a long time. Then she walked to the table, pulled the cloth away, and opened her laptop. She ran the search he had described, and for the first time in 3 months, she found the 3rd layer, a shell company registered in Wilmington, Delaware. It existed. It was real, and she had missed it entirely. She sat down slowly. The man who fixed her router had just done in 5 seconds what her entire finance team had failed to do in 90 days. She picked up the phone and called Greta Hollis, her head of engineering, the only person left in the company she trusted without reservation. "Greta, I need you to find out everything about the building, superintendent in my building. Everything." Greta ran the search that night. Public records came back clean. Education, employment history, residential records ordinary. But when she reached the period between 2014 and 2021, the trail went dark. His file at the Department of Justice was classified. All she found was a single line in a federal personnel index, a fragment that should have been redacted but was not. Asset retired, case handler redacted. Greta stared at her screen. Brennan Thayer was not just a data analyst who quit. He was something the federal government had considered an operational asset. And no one at Alderhaven Residences had the faintest idea. 1 week later, Prescott Dynamics detonated. Internal documents leaked to financial media, carefully curated, selectively damaging. Bloomberg ran the headline first. Richmond Times-Dispatch followed within the hour. CEO Joelle Prescott, accused of mismanaging tens of millions in company funds, competence questioned, board confidence shaken. The story painted her as reckless, inexperienced, overwhelmed. It did not mention Trent Morrissey. Not once. The board called an emergency meeting. 3 of 7 members demanded Joelle's resignation before the day was out. Trent sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, face arranged in careful sorrow. "I don't want to see you go, Joelle," he said quietly. But the numbers don't lie. He had orchestrated the leak himself, selected which documents to release, which context to strip, which narrative to construct. The goal was surgical: force the board to vote her out, clear the path for Falconer Capital, a private equity firm run by a man named Darius Falconer, who had been working with Trent for over a year to acquire Prescott Dynamics at a fraction of its value, strip its assets, and sell off the technology Joelle's father had spent his life building. Joelle fought back in the meeting, but she had no evidence to counter the narrative. She had suspicions, spreadsheets she barely understood, and a letter from a law firm she could not trace. The board scheduled a formal vote 10 days. If she could not prove her case, she would lose the company. She returned to Alderhaven that evening and stepped into the elevator. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, Brennan was there, kneeling beside an air filter housing, screwdriver in hand. He looked up, she looked down. Neither spoke, but Brennan saw at the particular hollowness behind her eyes that meant someone was losing a war they could not afford to lose. That night, at 11:15, Brennan sat in the basement security office, monitoring the building's camera feeds, a routine end-of-day task. On screen 3, the lobby camera captured Trent Morrissey entering the building through the main door. Beside him walked a man Brennan did not recognize, mid-50s, gray suit, leather briefcase, posture that spoke of wealth so old it no longer needed to announce itself. The 2 men spoke for 11 minutes near the mailboxes, just out of earshot of the doorman. Then the stranger left. Brennan did not know his name. But he knew this was not a social call. He captured the screen timestamp, faces, duration, and saved the image to a personal drive. First piece of evidence. He went back to Unit 4B. Willa was already asleep, curled on the fold-out couch, bare tucked under her chin. Brennan knelt beside the bed, pulled a case from underneath a laptop, the one he had used at the DOJ, 5 years untouched, never wiped. He opened it. The desktop loaded slowly, and there it was, in the center of the screen, a single file icon. Mapper 531, the forensic analysis software he had written himself, line by line, during 18 months of tracking the Kellerson Pacific network. He had not opened it in 5 years. Tonight, he double-clicked. The program launched, and Brennan went to work. He had 2 sources: the spreadsheet pattern he had memorized from his 2-second glance at Joelle's table, and publicly available records: SEC filings, Delaware Division of Corporations, Cayman Islands Corporate Registry. Mapper cross-referenced the data, layer by layer, connection by connection, and Brennan guided it the way a surgeon guides a scalpel: precise, patient, certain. By 4 in the morning, the picture was complete. $31 million had been siphoned from Prescott Dynamics over a 36-month period, routed through 4 shell companies in 3 jurisdictions, and deposited into a single account at a Cayman Islands bank. The account was registered under the name Morrissey Holdings Limited. Every transfer bore a digital fingerprint that pointed back to one man. Trent Morrissey was not protecting the company. He was hollowing it out. Brennan printed 14 pages. Charts, timelines, transfer maps, account registrations, and a single photograph, the lobby camera image of Trent standing beside the unknown man. He placed them in a brown envelope, carried it upstairs, and set it on the floor outside Unit 4A at 6 in the morning. He knocked twice and walked away. Joelle opened the door in a robe, looked down, picked up the envelope. She read the first page standing in the doorway. Her hands began to shake. By page 4, she was sitting on the floor, the same floor Brennan had found her on the night everything. Started staring at a transfer map so detailed, so precise, it looked like it had been assembled by a federal task force. Page 11 held the camera image Trent and the stranger, time-stamped, undeniable. She found Brennan in the basement 20 minutes later. He was changing a water filter, sleeves rolled up, shirt damp with sweat. She stood 3 feet away, envelope in hand. "Who are you?" He looked up, wrench still in his hand. "The guy who fixes your pipes." She held up the report. "A team of forensic accountants couldn't trace this in 3 months. You did it in one night." He said nothing for a moment. Then, he set the wrench down and spoke without looking at her. "You've got 9 days before the board vote. That should be enough." He picked the wrench back up. Joelle stood there for what felt like a long time, watching a man in a maintenance uniform dismantle a water filter with the same hands that had just dismantled a $31 million fraud. She walked away without another word, but something had changed in the way she saw him permanently, irreversibly, and she knew it. She tested the report. She gave it to Greta Hollis for independent verification. Greta spent 2 days cross-checking every data point and came back with a single sentence. "Joelle, whoever made this, they're not guessing. This is the work of someone who has operated at federal level." And then Greta added what Joelle already suspected. There was a former senior accountant named Marcus Dunhill, forced out of Prescott Dynamics 2 years ago, under circumstances no one had questioned at the time. If they could find him, they might have a living witness. The problem was that Marcus had disappeared. Brennan found him in under 48 hours. The DOJ had trained him to trace people the way other analysts traced money through utility records, DMV filings, public tax assessments, the invisible fingerprints that every life leaves behind. Marcus Dunhill was living in a rented house on a dirt road outside Fredericksburg, Virginia, 60 miles south of Richmond. Brennan drove there alone on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus opened the door with the face of a man who had been waiting for a knock he hoped would never come. He was thinner than his company photo suggested, with dark circles under his eyes and a beard that had grown past the point of intention. Brennan showed him the shell company diagram. "Trent used you to sign off on these transfers. You knew they were wrong. He threatened you, and you ran." Marcus stepped back, one hand gripping the door frame. "You don't understand. He has people, lawyers, connections." Brennan's voice did not rise. "He has a paper trail, Marcus, and right now, it leads to you." Marcus's hands trembled. "He said he'd destroy my family. My wife took the kids to her sisters in North Carolina. I haven't seen them in 14 months. Brennan looked at the man in front of him, a man who had been hollowed out by the same kind of fear Brennan had spent 7 years studying. "He's going to destroy 1,200 families if nobody talks." The silence that followed lasted almost a full minute. Then Marcus went inside, opened a drawer, and pulled out a black USB drive he had kept hidden for 2 years, 347 internal emails between Trent Morrissey and a man named Darius Falconer, detailing every phase of the acquisition plan. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, wrote a sworn statement in longhand, and signed it. Back in Richmond, Joelle had been digging deeper. Through a former contact at the FBI, she obtained a partially declassified personnel summary. The words on the screen made her sit perfectly still. Brennan Thayer, former lead analyst, DOJ Financial Crimes Unit, responsible for dismantling the Kellerson Pacific laundering ring, $220 million recovered, voluntarily retired, 2021. She read it 3 times. Then she looked up through the windshield of her parked car at the Alderhaven building at the window on the 4th floor, where, at that exact moment, a man in a gray maintenance shirt was probably replacing a light bulb or unclogging a drain, and she understood. She had overlooked the one person who could save her company because he wore the wrong uniform. That afternoon, Brennan picked Willa up from the bus stop. The two of them sat on the bench outside Alderhaven's front entrance. Willa cross-legged with her sketch pad, drawing with quiet concentration. Joelle walked past on her way inside. Willa looked up, smiled, and waved. "Hi. Do you want to see my drawing?" She held it up. 2 figures on a rooftop, a dark sky overhead. One star bigger and brighter than all the rest, colored in thick yellow crayon. Joelle crouched down. For the first time, she smiled, not a performance, not a mask, but something real. "It's beautiful, sweetie." "Which star is the brightest one?" Willa pointed. "That's Daddy's star. He always finds it first." Joelle looked at Brennan. He was looking at his daughter. Then he looked at Joelle. He said nothing, but something passed between them in that moment, quiet, almost invisible, like a star that had always been there but had only just been noticed. 3 days before the board vote, Trent struck. He filed a formal complaint with Alderhaven's property management company, accusing Brennan Thayer of unauthorized entry into Unit 4A and surveillance of a resident. He demanded immediate termination and eviction from staff housing within 48 hours. The property management office called Brennan in. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. "Mr. Thayer, you have 48 hours to vacate." Brennan did not argue. He walked back to Unit 4B and stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the apartment he had turned into a home for the past 2 years. Then he began packing. He took Willa's drawings off the walls one by one, careful not to tear the tape, and stacked them between sheets of cardboard. He folded clothes into boxes. He wrapped the kitchen plates in newspaper. He disassembled the fold-out couch and leaned it against the wall. The apartment looked the way it had when he first moved in, empty, impersonal, belonging to no one. When Willa came home from school that afternoon, she stood in the doorway of the apartment and looked at the bare walls and the cardboard boxes and the stripped bed. She held her bear against her chest and did not move for a long time. Then she asked the question she had asked before, in other apartments, in other cities, in other years. "Are we moving again, Daddy?" Her voice was small and steady, the voice of a child who had learned not to cry about things that kept happening. They had moved 3 times in 5 years. Each time, she had packed her drawings without being asked. Each time, she had taped them to the new walls without complaint. Brennan knelt in front of her and held both of her hands. "We'll be okay, sweetheart. We always are." She nodded. Then she walked to the stack of cardboard, pulled out her drawing of the rooftop stars, and held it against her chest next to the bear. She was not going to let that one get packed. Joelle learned about the eviction that evening. She found Brennan in the 4th-floor hallway, carrying a box of tools toward the service elevator. "Trent did this," she said. "He's trying to remove you because you're the only person who can prove what he's doing." Brennan set the box down. "I know." A pause. "But I've got a kid, Joelle. I don't get to play hero." She looked at him. Not at the analyst, not at the maintenance worker, but at the father standing in front of her holding a cardboard box and choosing his daughter over everything else. "Then let me fight," she said. "Give me what you have. All of it." He studied her face for a long time. Then he went into 4B and came back with the USB drive from Marcus Dunhill, the full mapper printout, and every piece of evidence he had gathered. He handed her the stack. "Page 6. Start there." Trent organized a pre-vote dinner the following night at a private restaurant in Richmond's Fan District. Every board member attended. Candlelight, white tablecloths, old wine. The evening was designed to solidify Alliance's one final performance before the vote that would remove Joelle Prescott and hand the company to a man who had spent 3 years stealing it. Joelle arrived uninvited. She walked through the restaurant door in a black blazer, alone, carrying nothing but a USB drive between her fingers. The table went silent. She pulled out an empty chair, sat down, and placed the drive on the glass surface directly in front of Trent Morrissey. "Before anyone votes tomorrow," she said, "I'd like to present the real financial report of Prescott Dynamics." Trent smiled, practiced, dismissive. "Joelle, this isn't the time or the $31 million, Trent." Her voice was level. 4 shell companies. 1 account in the Caymans. Your name on every single one. The table went absolutely still. No one moved. No one breathed. Trent's smile held for 1 more second, then flattened. He stood. "This is fabricated. She's desperate. And she's grasping at." He turned to the board. "You know me. 20 years I've served this company. Her father trusted me. And now she brings fairy tales from who? A janitor?" The restaurant door opened. A man stepped inside, mid-40s, thin, pale, wearing a coat that did not quite fit him. Marcus Dunhill. Behind him, Greta Hollis, carrying a stack of notarized documents under one arm. Trent saw Marcus and the smile died entirely. Not faded. Died. The way a light goes out when the wire is cut. Marcus sat down across from Trent and read his statement aloud. He described how Trent had coerced him into approving fraudulent transfers, how he had been threatened with criminal liability if he refused, how he had spent 2 years in hiding, separated from his family, terrified of retaliation. The USB drive was projected onto a laptop screen 347 emails between Trent Morrissey and Darius Falconer, outlining the full scope of the takeover plan. Acquisition timeline. Target price. A list of Prescott Dynamics assets to be liquidated within 90 days of transfer. Greta presented the technical evidence next. She had documented how Trent had deliberately delayed 3 critical R&D projects over the past 18 months, starving them of resources, reassigning engineers, killing timelines, all to deflate the company's valuation and make Falconer's buyout cheaper. Estimated damage to enterprise value, $47 million. The board members read the documents. One by one, their faces changed. A man at the end of the table looked up from the printout. "Is any of this true, Trent?" Trent stood. His voice was still smooth, still controlled, but the edges were beginning to fray. "This is a setup. That maintenance man in her building, he's behind this. He broke into our systems. He fabricated." Joelle cut him off. Her voice was calm. Absolutely calm. "His name is Brennan Thayer, former lead analyst at the Department of Justice, Financial Crimes Unit. He dismantled a $220 million laundering network, the Kellerson Pacific case. Voluntarily retired to raise his daughter alone." She paused, let the silence fill the room. Then she looked directly into Trent's eyes. "He found your entire trail in one night, what you spent 3 years trying to bury." Trent opened his mouth to respond, but Joelle was not finished. She lowered her voice not for drama, but because what she was about to say did not need volume. "You told everyone he fixes toilets, but he's the reason your empire has a leak you can't plug." No one spoke. The silence was total, the kind of silence that does not break on its own, the kind that has to be shattered by something external. Because everyone in the room has lost the ability to form words. Trent looked from face to face around the table. Not a single pair of eyes met his. Not one. Joelle turned her laptop toward the table and projected the full mapper analysis. Onto the wall screen, 4 layers of shell companies, timestamps, routing numbers, the Cayman Islands account, registered under Morrissey Holdings Limited. Beside it, the lobby camera image from Alderhaven Residences. Trent Morrissey, standing next to Darius Falconer, 10:47 p.m. Date stamped, faces clear. Trent moved toward the door. It opened before he reached it. 2 attorneys representing Prescott Dynamics stood in the hallway, holding a subpoena from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Behind them, 2 FBI agents waited in the corridor. The board voted at the table, 7-0. Joelle Prescott remained CEO. Trent Morrissey was terminated immediately. All assets connected to Morrissey Holdings Limited were frozen pending federal investigation. Darius Falconer received SEC notification before midnight. The 1,200 employees of Prescott Dynamics would report to work the next morning with no idea how close they had come to losing everything: their jobs, their benefits, the futures they had planned around a company they believed in. Trent was escorted out of the restaurant without speaking. He did not look at Joelle. He did not look at Marcus. He walked between the 2 FBI agents with his chin raised and his jaw locked, and the last thing he saw before the door closed behind him was the mapper diagram still glowing on the wall screen. His entire empire of fraud, disassembled and displayed in 14 pages, by a man who earned less in a year than Trent spent on suits. In the bottom right corner of the last page, written in pencil and small, steady handwriting, were 5 words: "You're not alone. B." She folded the envelope and slipped it into the inside pocket of her blazer. 2 weeks later, Richmond settled into October. The leaves along Grace Street turned copper and gold, and the air through the open windows of Alderhaven Residences carried the first real chill of autumn. Brennan was not evicted. Joelle had acquired the building's management contract through a personal investment entity and voided the termination order on her first day of control. She did not tell him in advance. He found out when the property manager knocked on 4B the next morning and said simply, "Disregard the notice, Mr. Thayer." "You're staying." Brennan stared at the man for a moment, then nodded and closed the door. That afternoon, Willa taped her drawings back on the walls, every single one, in exactly the same places. A week later, Joelle offered Brennan a position at Prescott Dynamics Director of Financial Integrity. Private office, team of 8, a salary 20 times what he earned fixing pipes. He declined. They were standing in the hallway between 4A and 4B when she made the offer, and when he said no, she asked why. "I fix things, Joelle. That's what I do." She studied him. "You could fix things at a much bigger scale." Brennan looked past her, through the small hallway window, to the bench outside the building where Willa sat in the afternoon light with her sketch pad open, drawing something he could not see from this distance. "I already am," he said. Joelle understood then. He was not hiding from the world he had left. He had found something the world could not offer him, a life measured not in cases closed or dollars recovered, but in Friday nights on the roof with his daughter, or in cereal bowls and school buses and drawings taped to bare walls. He had chosen this, not because he was less than what he had been, but because he had decided what mattered more. She did one more thing. She established a scholarship fund in her father's name for the children of Prescott Dynamics employees. Willa Thayer was the first recipient. She did not tell Brennan. He found out through a letter from Willa's school, and when he finished reading it, he looked at the door of 4A and nodded once, slowly, to no one. On a Friday night in the middle of October, Brennan and Willa climbed the stairs to the rooftop of Alderhaven, the way they always did. Willa spread the blanket. Brennan lay down beside her. The sky above Richmond was clear, not perfectly clear, not country dark, but clear enough to see the stars that mattered. Willa pointed upward, tracing invisible lines between the lights. "That one's the brightest," she said. "You always find it first." The rooftop door opened. Joelle stepped through, carrying a paper bag, 2 cups of hot tea, and a small box of cookies. She did not say anything. She walked to the edge of the blanket and sat down beside Brennan, close enough that the sleeve of her coat nearly touched his arm. Nearly. Not quite. Willa rolled toward her, grabbed her hand, and pulled her down. "Look. That one right there." The 3 of them lay on the blanket in the October wind, looking up. No one spoke. Willa yawned, curled between them, tucked the bear under her chin, and closed her eyes. The city hummed below. The stars held their positions above. And somewhere between the two, on the roof of a building where no one had ever thought to look, 3 people lay still, not because they had run out of words, but because, for once, none were needed. Neither of them had been looking for anything behind that door, but some doors, once opened, refused to close, and the person standing on the other side turns out to be exactly the one you didn't know you needed.